Sego sewa gwego, Alyssa ni waksanoda, ganyake hagani wago panjota, dan neo waganyata, oswego ni dewa gena, da neo wagatsanuni, ji ganto, wadewa yatarorakte. Hello, my name is Alyssa General. I'm Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, and yes, we're going to be covering storytelling today through a few different mediums. I have a little introduction of myself here. So this is me, and I'm the daughter of artist David General, who's a sculptor, and who's been a huge influence on, I guess, my storytelling, but also my arts as well. So I have this is me, that's my regani, and I am an artist, but I'm also an educator as well. Previously, before having this little bundle of joy in front of me, I was a teacher at the Everlasting Tree School, which is a Ganyageha Mohawk immersion, Waldorf-inspired school here in Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. And a lot of the work that we do there is based in art and story, so I felt like it was quite a perfect blend of things for me to, I guess, kind of delve into. And through my work there, it really honestly helped me, I feel like, become a better storyteller, but also realize how important stories are to, in pedagogy, but also within, I guess, bringing to life a lot of our history and a lot of our culture, because one of the things that I feel like we forget when we're looking at our stories is that it is actually a history, and that it just gets so downgraded, or just put down it's not real, or things like that. It's commonly, I feel like, something I've heard in other conversations about our traditional stories, but when you really get into them and when you really delve into them, they tell a lot about our history before colonization. And we have to remember that not only are the wampum belts a part of that storytelling and a part of that conveying of history, but these stories are as well. So there's a couple of different documents that I use. One of them didn't show up, but this is the 32nd annual report of the Bureau of American Ethnology, and this is one of my favorite books. There's another one that's called Seneca Indian Myths, but both of these stories, they have a whole bunch of stories that are so important, and I feel like a lot of the time we get kind of talking and I guess really repetitive with the creation story and with the Great Law, and those are a few of the only ones you hear, along with the Ogori Goa, or along with, what are some of the other ones? When I say the corn husk doll, really super, those stories are really super familiar, but there are so many more out there that really super, there are I guess some of my favorites. A few of them being there is one called The Deserted Village, which is kind of a Haudenosaunee Sleeping Beauty story. Or there's another one about let me see, there's so many stories about the Thunders that I really appreciate and absolutely love. I think one of the more well-known ones of that collection is the Horseshoe Falls and the creation of the Horseshoe Falls. But there are just so many more, and I think it's important to really delve into them and start to see them through the lens of being historical documents worthy of kind of, I guess, mapping out when things changed for us and when certain customs stopped. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. So kind of getting back to this imagery in mind and talking about my family. My dad and my sister, who's actually in the audience right here, Aisha, they used to tell me stories a lot as a child. And our house was filled with all of these beautiful paintings from my father, but also from other artists that we've come to know, like Carl Bean and Arthur Schilling. And I loved how so much of their artwork carries more of a story than you kind of see in typical, I want to say, Western artwork. So this is an example of some of the works that we've done. Right up here, I'm not too sure, in the corner here, this is a monument my dad worked on, which is called Equals Among Us. This is the one that he did called The Gathering, which is at the Billy Bishop Airport, and this one is in front of the Joe in Six Nations. And then there's some of his older pieces. So these are the kind of the pieces that would be carry a bunch of these stories. And I remember one day he was like, I'm going to take you around the house and I'm going to tell you each one of the stories that's related to this painting. And I absolutely loved that. And I swear, like, I still remember all of the stories that he covered, and I got really jealous when another one of my sisters, she's got the Hino one, and I love that story so much. But it really kind of, like, seeing all of these artists working with stories and how they tell stories was really super inspiring, and it really went on to inspire, like, the way that I do my artwork. And within the language as well, this is part of, like, what's influenced how I visualize things, because I'm not too sure how many of you are familiar with Ganyak Geha, but Ganyak Geha is a polysynthetic language, which means that this language is comprised of a whole bunch of different parts that come together to form a word. So in reality, all of our words are sentences. So this one up here, I'm going to click in on it. This is one of the first pieces I've done in this style. And I called it Rediscarnagete, which means they carry rust on their shoulders. And I kind of tied it into the piece because I love the way that people described this, and it was such like I guess like a visually striking word. And so I wanted to kind of illuminate like how exactly that fits into like what are Rediscarnagete, and it's our word for a young man, but kind of like the responsibility that he carries to uphold his nation, because the color that they paint their shoulders in was representative of the nation that they came from and the type of earth they came from. And if any of you that are familiar with Ganyak Geha, you'll know that to say that it's like I'm of this nation, you say like Ganyak Geha ga niwako hunjoda. I am like I'm of the Mohawk nation, but like further on from that, it means that I like. Basically, I guess like I'm a person of the flint, but like it's the type of earth that I come from. So I thought that was like a beautiful kind of encapsulation of how like to carry yourself, like within that responsibility of upholding your nation. So that's why there's like elements of the Ohanagiri Wadekwa in this piece. So as I said before, one of my favorite stories is it's called Hino Destroys the Horned Serpent. And this one is like, well, I guess like part of this is self-explanatory, but the region where we say the thunderers reside is called Onyagra or Niagara. So Onyagra means the neck, because basically the Niagara River acts as a conduit from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. So it's kind of like, you know, like you take a sip of water and it's traveling down your neck into your stomach and all of that. But, so I highlighted the neck in this part of it. But I also wanted to kind of capture like how much beauty that I saw in that region, because the waters there are so much different than they are in other places. But that place just held such a huge and deep and vibrant history for us as Haudenosaunee. I just wanted to be able to capture that. This piece right here was inspired by the Great Law, Pedagogy. And what I was learning about Pedagogy, it was just really interesting to go through the story and to talk about like what exactly does that word mean and why was it used for him. So in some cases, Pedagogy, a lot of people say it will mean like he's kind of been cast aside, or he's kind of been swept aside. And I kind of wanted to like figure out a way to like bring that forward, that this was a person that was like on the outskirts of things, that wasn't that was feared and was kind of like feared and abandoned. And so for this piece, I wanted it to kind of like, I wanted him not to be fully there, because like, you know, parts of his humanity have been kind of swept aside. So these are all of these ways that I've encapsulated, I've tried to like capture all of these legends within the artwork that I do. And I'll kind of get to the references, because I feel like my art style is an amalgamation of a lot of different people's art styles, but also like the way that they tell their stories. So I wanted to be able to capture a bit of that in here. So this one is based off of Jikusaze, which is means she's got a new face, and it means like a few different things in like other languages as well. Like some will say Jikuses, but it like she's got a long face. But I kind of like the jikusaze, like she's got a new face because of what it entails within the Haudenosaunee, like the legend of the Great Law, or I want to say the legacy of the Great Law, that she was one of the first people to accept it, and she was one of the first people to really like change, I guess like change her mind and become a better person. So through accepting it. So I kind of wanted to demonstrate that. And she just happened to be Lynx clan as well, so I wanted to incorporate that in there as well. But I had done like the darkness around her face to kind of emphasize that she's like new, that she has like, there's this newness to her as well. This newness and this power. So I decided to depict it that way. So coming over to our next slide. Oh, so this is that book again. I want to say that like quite a bit of the imagery that I've taken for these pieces as well is influenced by what I read. I'm a huge advocate of like using our traditional stories and just like the way that they can impact and inspire, because one of the first stories that I heard that really, I want to say really struck me and really stuck with me growing up was, I was in grade 8 and we had somebody come in, and that's when I heard that Hino destroys the horned serpent. And I didn't know this until I became an educator, but that there is like a specific time that you tell stories. There's a certain time when stories resonate with a child more than it will in any other time in their life. So it's really about the right thing at the right time. So we have so many stories about like how the bear, like, I want to say like, what is it? How the bear got like lost his tail, or like, how the chipmunk got its stripes. All of these different stories like that really kind of, I want to say, lay the groundwork for a child to have a good relationship with others within their peer group. Whereas when you get into like a little bit more of the stories that have people in them, I want to say that when you're looking at stories, like I want to say like Hino destroys the horned serpent. I'll get into talking about that a little bit more afterwards, because I want to kind of explain the story, but then what that story is carrying and what knowledge that story is carrying as well. But within that story, they often talk about how it's age appropriate for preteens. And that's when that's when it seems like those stories pop up a little bit more. And it wasn't until I was teaching in a Waldorf school where you kind of got that alignment of the pedagogy, because within like regular mainstream Waldorf schools, they're going to teach, they end up teaching like Norse mythology and Greek mythology at specific times within the child's development, because the child needs something specific from the stories. And as they get older, they end up needing truer stories. Like I remember sitting at a table, and I love telling stories. So it was always during lunch, we would sit down, and I would tell like one of the legends that I knew. But there was a point where one of the students, where he's like, I kind of want to hear real stories. Want to hear real stories. But like I had to kind of like explain, like these are moments in our history. These are like important parts of it. And it took some like further delving into, but it was interesting to see that student was already in that shift of where they needed biographies. So I wanted to kind of like talk a little bit about how that like feeds into that, into the way that a child develops as well. So from that, one of the things that I think is interesting about our art and about our stories housing so much of our culture and our language. And I guess when I say like, and our historical elements of things, I feel like there are certain parts of it that we kind of forget. So like when we talk about the creation story and we go through like, you're talking about Sky Woman falling and the life that she has to live on like Turtle Island, and how she begins to start all of that creation by dancing, but then having her sons being born, and all of these like little things that kind of like, I guess like make up that story, and like all of like, I guess like the story in its entirety, I always felt was a bit of a manual on how to live on Turtle Island. It was almost like Hitchhiker's Guide to Living on Turtle Island, because it's essentially a manual. If you look at it in a certain context, in a historical context, it gives you so much information that we still do today, but that is incredibly important for our existence here. So one of the things that I think stuck out to me the most was one of my friends, he's a Swiss German farmer. I went to go visit him, and we were standing outside, we were watching a thunderstorm, and he goes, oh, he's like, in Switzerland, we'd be so thankful for when it thundered. And I was like, oh, really, why? He's like, because thunder imbibes the earth with nitrogen, which makes all the crops better. Like everything grows better. And I thought, that's so, why is that? And it just stuck with me. And so I remember like, just kind of like throughout my whole like visit with them, I kept trying to think about, why is it that this is sticking with me? And I feel like I've heard this before, but where have I heard it from? And it occurred to me that after Sky Woman's daughter is born, her daughter is impregnated by, and in the story it comes up to be a whole bunch of different beings that it could be. Like it could be the way that it's translated. Some people will say it was the wind, or some people will say that, oh no, it's like it's not the wind, it's the not turtle man, I can't remember, I think it is turtle man. Yeah, it's like turtle man, or like it's this person. And to me, it kind of, in my opinion, I kind of thought it made sense that it was the winds, because when you say Radiweras, like it encompasses winds, it encompasses thunder and rain, and of course, like lightning, and why the being that is the lead of all of those things is a thunderer makes so much sense, because the thunder impregnates the daughter, but then also like it's kind of telling you like this is the time of season when you would plant, is when there's thunder. You would plant when there's thunder, because the nitrogen is going to give you more. And I went really super abstract there like the first time I had heard that, because I was like, well, I'm like, wow, it's like positive and negative, and that's why there's positive and negative, and that's why you have to sing seed songs, because you're trying to bring out the positive in the plant so that they will grow better and they'll nourish you better. So there's all these little connections that you kind of get like from like just hearing and seeing and experiencing different things, and how it relates to these stories. It relates to this worldview. Another one that I thought was really super beautiful too, and it was actually something my daughter brought forward. Her teacher, Hideni Sean Thompson, who is an awesome speaker and an awesome storyteller, he was telling his students like the story of Ogwardigoa, and my daughter had heard it all the way along, but like I think it was, I want to say she must have been 9 years old, and she stepped outside. She was like, I'm gonna go outside and play. I'm like, all right, like go ahead. She stepped outside, she had like put a jacket on, went outside, and she came back in right away. And I was like, what happened? Was it like, what was wrong? And she was like, the sumac is red. It's hunting season. Like I can't wear deer colors anymore. And so she went in, she changed her jacket and went back outside. But I thought that was such like I guess like a true testament to the way that like stories influence like that visual that she knew that from that Ogwardigoa story, that as soon as like those leaves are red, that's like a time when she knows that it's hunting season. And so it's like those little things that are really super, like they stick with kids, and I think it's because it's so visual. And when you're looking at our stories are very I want to say very specific. Like they're very specific on how on the details they give. Like, you know, like exactly this many ears of corn, exactly this many nights, exactly this, like it's a very detailed language. I think it's very detailed language within the stories, but I think it's very detailed because, for one, our language is that way. Our language carries so much detail. You know, like it's depending on how you say things, you could like you could really like, I guess like I want to say mess up what you're trying to say, but you could really like you can really give very specific detail. Like I could say like, you know, I'm trying to think of something like Dego Wistige, $2 or something like that, but it's one word, but like you can incorporate you can incorporate so much more, like little specific things, or asanika nahage, like 3 pieces of corn, or 3 seeds rather. So I think because our language is so detailed, that our stories in turn become so detailed as well. And so I'm kind of like gonna go through,
I guess this is how my art kind of evolved contemporarily. These are some images I did for a project with KGLPP, the Gawanio Language Preservation Project. And down here is one that I did for a children's television show called Dudu Danu Awari, which it's created by Mary and Delaron. I think they've done a fantastic job of like encapsulating so many of our traditional stories and really modernizing them and making them like these like new little snippets. And I always thought it was super cute, like I thought it was like cute and wonderful that she always got local artists to be able to like contribute their artwork to this. So like sometimes storytelling can look a little bit differently. This is like this is a book I kind of co-wrote with one of my friends. These are some comics that we made. This says Gundam Guardiax and it says Yatat Desadansas and he's hoarding cookies. So Gundam Guardiax means I'm hungry. Yatat Desadansas means you don't deserve it. And he's hoarding the cookies. So these were ways that I used, I guess, art and storytelling in order to help myself learn the language better. Is because one of the things that we forget within, like, I guess, like the scope of storytelling and within the scope of artwork even, is that you're able to create this visual and you're able to create context for it. And for language learning, that is incredibly important because you need both of those relationships in order to make something, in order to, I guess, like not make something memorable, but it's kind of a little bit that way. So in creating something that's like visually, like visually, however you like it, like beautiful, cute, inspiring, pairing it with like something in the language that you think is really super funny, and then kind of blending it together to develop this story, just kind of helped you. I guess like for me, like this, it helped me remember Yatat Desadansas, because like then it was a very useful word for me, but then it also was like a word that was new to me, and I was able to create context to it through the story. And this one was one of my friends. She was translating a word, and she goes, "How do you visualize this?" Like, she's like, "I'm telling my students a story," and she's like, "I'm saying she flew him to the roof." She's like, "What do you see when I say that?" Like, she's like, "That's what the translation is." And so I was like, "I don't know." So I drew her a picture to send it to her. So it's in Ganyak Geha, but it's like using Harry Potter stuff. So it says Wingardium Leviosa, or not Wingardium Leviosa, yeah, no, Wingardium Leviosa. So that was just a way of like capturing it. I've dabbled in a little bit of filmmaking as well. Under the guidance of Zoe Hopkins, who is a really fabulous filmmaker and storyteller. She guided us with this project. And here's where like I kind of, I guess, started to also make the connection. This was prior to me working with the Everlasting Tree School. I was working with Onguan Ganjoko, which is a Mohawk immersion, adult immersion school in Six Nations. And one of the things that I thought was really cool about this project was we started cultivating all of these stories to kind of like pump out to like teach different aspects of the language, but also just to kind of like create like something entertaining and enjoy, like something our other speakers could enjoy. It was a really wonderful project. One of the things that I thought was really cool about it is I got to see kind of like the before and after effects of it. Like, what do creating stories for our children, like in this platform, what is it, like what is the effect of it afterwards? And I thought that was a pretty cool thing to see. I'll explain that in a second a little bit better. But I wanted to show this just because I wanted to show that sometimes, I want to say, our artwork is so different, and our artwork carries so much of a story. And it carries more story than I think I've seen in other places. You know, like everybody's like, "Oh, Mona Lisa, smile." And like, oh, but the beauty of like the beautiful colors of like Starry Night, and like the amazing like detail in, oh my gosh, I think it's the Spark of Life. I can't remember. It's the Michelangelo
Starry Night.
No, not Starry Night. The Michelangelo, this one. I can't remember what it is, but it's on like the...
Oh, the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, it's on the Sistine Chapel, and I was like, I'm missing something. And then you have like pieces like Mondrian and like Monet and all of these like wonderful, beautiful artists. But to me, I'm like, I always felt a little bit detached from the artwork because the artwork never carried a story. And so when I started looking at more of our artwork, you know, different artists, like I have some like Maxime Noel and what is it? There's Arthur Schilling, my dad's artwork, David General, Gertrude Howie, who's an awesome artist as well in the community, and Norval Moore. So when I started looking at more of this artwork, I felt like it told a lot more of a story. And this was one of the pieces that I feel like inspired me quite a lot, is this Arthur Schilling piece. I believe it was, it's a self-portrait of him, but from a distance, all you saw was his face. Like from, I guess like from far back, you can really it just looks like an illustration of himself, a really beautiful one. But once you kind of got into it, you saw that he was pulling things in and taking things. So there's like a little face here, and there's fish all the way woven through his hair. And I feel like that, I love that interconnectedness. And I feel like that's a lot of what our artwork shows, is that we are not separate from nature. Nature, we are part of it. And so when you look at our language and you look at our storytelling, I feel like it's all part of it. They're all connected together. They're all in that together, like the storytelling. Like, and I feel like that's why our language was not written, because to have that visual, it just made it so much more ingrained than anything else. Because I feel like nothing speaks more volumes. That like you can describe something till you're blue in the face about it, but nothing beats the experience or creating the experience for someone else. And then with nothing, I feel like you see that so much with children in particular, because like often when a child hears a story that really inspires them, they take it home and they go play it because they're like, oh, that was so awesome. So I think that's really super. I remember we had done like a story about corned beans and squash in my class, and one of the students, three of them outside were playing, and they were like, oh, like there's three of us, like you could be Honesta, I could be Oseida, and she could be Ona Osurda. And so I thought that was cute, that it was like I said, like our stories live in our kids, and so when you bring them that, how vivid those stories can be, they're going to internalize it, and they're going to take it, and that's part of what keeps history going forward, and those stories going forward, and help keeping that story and those cultures alive. So this is just like a few more art, like a little bit more artwork where I felt like it was, it's just visually stunning, and like it really pulls you in. And you want to, I feel like it was, the way that I can describe it is it's just intriguing, because you want to know more about that story. Like my first glance at this, I'd be like, oh my gosh, she's falling. Like what is the rest of the story to this? Or, like what is happening in this scene? Like why is this, like what is, like I don't know, if I were somebody not in the culture, well, even in the culture, I still think that these pieces are beautiful, and that they hold so much of our ways of life and our insights and how we see the world. So I wanted to just kind of like acknowledge like all of the ways that our art impacts our storytelling and our language. I'll get into this in a second. There was a reason for this, but I'm just going to go ahead because I don't want to run too much out of time, but I wanted to kind of tell a story that kind of explains the reason why if we look at stories a different way, we can really see that the history that they carry. So the story is my favorite, and it's the one that I mentioned earlier, which was like that thunder destroys the horned serpent. So there once was this beautiful girl, and she lived in this village, and every man in the village wanted to marry her, but she told them all no. She said no to every single man. And finally, this young, handsome, strapping young man comes to her door and said, I've come to marry you. And she's so taken by him that she says yes immediately, without even really consulting with her mom. But when she does ask her mom says, you've been picky and you've like said no to pretty much every single man in the village, so you can just go and marry that man. So she goes and she marries the man, and then one day he tells her, I'm gonna go hunting, and when I come back, you can't be afraid of me. And she said, okay, all right. So he left, and he left out the door, and she heard this really weird crack sound. And then this gigantic serpent returned, and he slithered up to her, and he rested his gigantic head on her lap, and he said, feed me. And so she fed this serpent, she fed him all manner of vermin, like worms and bugs, and when the snake was finally satiated, he slithered out, and she heard that same crack sound, and then in walked her husband. And he said, were you afraid of me? She said no. But in her heart of hearts, she was terrified. And so she started trying to think of ways that she could escape. So one day, early in the morning before her husband woke, she decided that she was going to sneak out. So she opened the door and she slowly started to make her way out. And then when she turned around, she realized that there were 7 gigantic snakes sunning themselves on the rocks outside her house. And they were huge. And she knew then that there was no way that she was going to make it out alive, and that she was going to have to stay. So one day, she wanders into the woods and she's collecting firewood. And this man approaches her and he goes, my granddaughter, I feel so bad for you. You've married a terrible man. This man has been poisoning the water by your village, and when the people die and are buried, he eats them. Him and his brothers. There's a way you can stop them though, and we can help you. But first you have to go to your house and you have to find a bundle of 7 hearts. And once you find that, you're gonna have to bring it to us. Bring it to the lake. And so she rushed home and she started tearing the house apart and looking for the hearts. And then finally, when she did find them, she started to run. She left the house as fast as she could and she started to run because she realized that as soon as she touched those hearts, that her husband knew what was happening. So she ran through the forest and she was running as hard as fast as she could. And then finally, she reached the lakes, but she could still hear the rattle of her husband slithering over the leaves chasing her. And he yelled out to her, I know where you are and I'm gonna find you. And so as she got to the edge of the lake, she looked up and there were the thunders. And the lead thunder, Hino, was there, and that was the man that she met in the forest. And so he pulled her up into the thundercloud, and they had a great battle with the snake. And the snake, once they had killed it, they quartered it up and they put its head on a post. But they said that the snake looked at the girl in such a way that they weren't comfortable with leaving her there. So they decided that they were going to take her with them. So for a year she stayed with the thunderers. And then one day, one of them went missing. And two of the other thunderers came back and they told them that one thunder had been taken by a gigantic leech and he was being held underneath the lake. And so each of the thunderers took a chance shooting their arrows at this gigantic leech. And then finally Hino looked at the girl and he goes, let her have a chance, let her try. So with her first arrow she shot, she hit the leech and it started to writhe in the waters and created a huge, huge whirlpool. And then she shot again and everything on the water went still. And the thunder returned. And they realized that she was far too strong to stay with them. She was starting to gain their powers. And so they knew it was time for her then to return home. So they sent her home. And her mom was so happy to receive her back. And so as they settled into their life again, she had to remember something that the thunderers told her, because they gave her a very specific set of instructions before she returned home. They told her that she was not to cook or clean for 10 days because she was still too strong. She still had their power, so she couldn't cook or clean for 10 days. And so finally her mom asked her, oh, can you help me with dinner? And she said, no, I can't. I can't help you. I'm sorry. And the mom said, okay, I'll let it go this time. She just got back. It was a pretty harrowing journey, so I'll just let her be. And then the next day, the mom's like, oh, can you help me clean this? She said, no, I can't. And she's like, all right, like I'll give her I'll give her her time and her space. And then finally, this pattern repeated up until the 9th day, until finally the mother was like, you better start pulling your weight around here, or like, there's the door, pretty much. And so finally she was like, okay, like I can go pound corn. And so she went out to the corn pounder and she picked up the cudgel, and when she brought it down, she split it in half and she created a small earthquake because she was so powerful still from having that thunder's energy and like still carrying the power of the thunder with her. So this was one of my favorite stories, and I just thought it was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And I heard this when I was an early preteen. And this story carries so much, because I feel like when you look at thunder stories, it really shows you, like, you're seeing the difference between a thunder and a serpent. And I remember using this before to like talk about the qualities of a partner. Like, okay, like, did she choose a good partner? Like, what was not so great about the serpent, or what was great about the serpent and what was not so great? And they're like, well, he was handsome. Like, yeah, he's handsome. They're like, but what else? What else did he do? How did he make her feel? And then they're like, well, he made her feel like she couldn't go home. They made her feel like cut off from everybody else. Like, he scared her. I said, yep, like, that's true. It's like, what did the thunders do? The thunders made her feel more powerful. Yep, that's right. Like, the thunders gave her freedom. They helped her to become free again. Like, yep, they returned her to her family. Yep, that's good. Like, and I feel like when you break apart a story a little bit like that, you start to see different things. Like, even for within, like, that story talks about our how do I describe it? Our responsibility as women as well, like to not cook or clean during our menses, things like that. And that's all detailed within that story. And it's interesting because when I think I started to delve into the wall collection, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like a male equivalent to that story where it's pretty much the exact same story, but it's about a boy going out into the forest and meeting a thunder, and then the thunder helping him to overcome whatever his trial was. Oh, sorry. So these stories, like I said, they carry so much more when we're willing to look at them in more detail and in more depth. And I feel like they stick with us more because they are so visually stunning. Like my mom always said, like, because whenever I, would start to like get to the age where I was using a tone, and so she would be like you have to be mindful of the way that you say things, because like somebody's going to remember how you made them feel rather than maybe what you said. And I think that's even like a Maya Angelou, maybe not Maya Angelou, I think it is a Maya Angelou quote though, where it's like, I'm pretty sure it's in here. But I think to prove my point, I had this little clip of this famous scene from, I think there's this really kind of, it's not a fake thing, but it's like, I think it's called the Mandela effect, where it's like sometimes like you'll see, like you think something is a certain way, but really it's a different way. But it's like, I kind of just tried to like drive home the point where it's like, it's how it made you feel rather than what was being said. So I'm gonna ask somebody in the audience, but maybe not Chelsea or Ryan, because I know that you're gonna know this really well. What was the famous line for this man?
You asked me this before, so I know.
Okay, all right, so my sister's out. Who knows the famous line?
In that scene?
Yeah, in the scene where, in the scene where Luke just got his hand cut off.
Oh, Luke, I'm your father?
Yeah, Luke, I'm your father. So,
I am your father.
so he didn't say Luke. He says, no, I am your father. It's So it's just kind of like I just wanted to use it to illustrate that we knew what the big emotion was in that scene. It was the shock that he like met his father. So it didn't matter that the words were not correct. Didn't matter that it was Luke, I am your father. And that it was actually no, I am your father. So little things like that where the emotion of the story will carry the knowledge. So oh yeah, there it is, Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget the way you made them feel. And I feel like that's what our stories do so perfectly. And I had included all of these different images of things where, you know, like the emotion was behind it, like the, you know, like I always feel like this is like the no that kind of rocked the world, or even like how, the emotion of like Hiawatha is he's waiting to be condoled, or even like I put this in there because my sister took my daughter to go see this performance of The Gathering, and when the dancers came out, my daughter just went, beautiful, beautiful. So just kind of like that, it's able to capture so much more. And these are my two favorite quotes. Well, one of them is my most favorite quote, and it's by Ken Robinson. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. And I feel like that's what our language and that's what our stories do. It just makes us feel alive. And then also, like, I think this was for some other presentation, so I'm not going to really read that one. But these are some of the pieces that so I said I would get back to this, but these are some of the pieces that we worked on with Ongo Onigajokwa. So one of them is a Star Wars. So it's called a Swede, which means like a poorly made replication of a really famous film. It's kind of made, I want to say it's made famous by the Be Kind Rewind movie. So it's like basically terrible acting. Well, I don't know. I don't want to downplay. They're great actors. Terrible costumes, terrible costumes. But just kind of like encapsulating the story and the language. And then this one up here is Gerda Hiwage, Jeff Doreen, singing a translation he did of the song Blackbird by the Beatles. And I thought that was pretty cool because I just put it in there, like I wanted to say like sometimes storytelling is also great for teaching children new words as well, depending on how you do it. We have a teacher at the school, her name's Ojisto Kuyo, Missy Elliott, who does a fantastic job of storytelling, and she just creates such like a beautiful scenery and beautiful stories for her children, for her students. This way, like, and using this in a different way, I was editing this film, this like the Blackbird video. I was helping to edit it, and one of the things that I realized was as I was editing it, my daughter was singing it because she was like it just was so catchy to her, and I thought that this was like a really cool way that like, you know, like storytelling, but then also like music and all of these different forms of art. Like I want to say like our language is such a huge vessel for art, and so it's like kind of neat to see how it just kind of like the children are able to like take so much out of it without very much exposure. So I'll play them quickly because I think we only have like 10 minutes left. So I helped edit this film. I didn't do very much of the shooting of it. I'll just play a little bit of it. and then I'll kind of go to the next one, because I think the next one's a little bit longer, but yeah, so she was like, she kept saying, she kept singing parts of the song as I was editing it, and she was like, oh, can you play that, like, Jidanji J? But it's like, kids are such, like I said, like such a vessel for language and for creativity and for story, so they really kind of like resonate with things that kind of, I want to say, like, with a lot of artistic things. Let me see, I'm just gonna close this or head to the next one. So this one is Star Wars, and the one thing that I remember when we were working on this project was we needed to find a story that everybody knew, or a majority of people knew the story, so that the language could be, maybe not like, you didn't have to know the language fully to understand what was happening in the story. So I'll just kind of like play it just so that you can see, but it's just like a little ways in which working with stories and working with familiar stories really help promote language. Let's see. Here we go.
Ne o knize asqueni.
Te vogliono giorni ne gai dumine ne guardunca ne binary neha.
Garukka niin.
Tode, on kino ne giga. Lu, ja hasat ne giga gai ne jiju wanusude.
Wada ne giga gai duni. Ji Obi-Wan Kenobi rao ne auha. Legendariga?
Uri wirdiri in I ne Obi-Wan.
Perché non posso domani? Ne o knize asqueni.
Ja ni har ro på ne giga. Tirapaniskan ne yaidene. Dat nu asevian detta ne gasat stansora goa. Han Solo nu yon gatti quennion in Millennium Falcon. Rakroris ne Chewie ci se a Pisa sonko ka yeza hun visere Alderaan yung way. What King Edgar's the Imperial cruisers that no yet local bulk cruisers dega. Given the Corellian ships in an Azojikawan. Hutsway. Neon hot the Oji Dansaraga ne Millennium Falcon Roxdana. Boom 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 boom. Boom 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 boom. De serata, Luke, de serata.
Chewie, så den är redan där unga!
Luke, isas ne gasat stansora goa.
yeah, so that was a way that we utilized a story in order to help kids like learn the language, but then also just using something that was really super familiar in order to be the vessel for that language usage. So it was universal for everyone. So I think that is everything I have for my presentation. So, ya go, say go.